Hi David, you did a nice job with your series. Having a common theme of family and friends brought together with food certainly works well, and in that case having essentially a still life of just the food it makes sense. If you didn't have that kind of food with friends with food theme and family with food, then that one would probably stick out a little bit as an outlier. But again, because of the overall theme you had, I think it works well. You mentioned in your essay the rule of threes and how having that kind of repetition is a good thing. So we see it here with the bread. We also see it in a different way, just in that we have three different pictures of people that you care about. And so I think that that's also a nice aspect of your project. For this first picture here, we see a little bit of a hot spot. Now, that's a tricky thing whenever you have a very directional light source like this, and so the oven light's only on the one side. It makes sense that the one that's closest is going to be a little overexposed compared to the one in the back, which is a little under. It's especially tricky when you have something like foil in there that's going to reflect the light. Now, there's really nothing to be done about the specular highlights on the metal. One of the things that you could do is a little editing on the bread itself. Now, there's a number of tools that you use, and you had mentioned that you use the healing brush, I think, and the cloning brush. Now, I think you said you use a spot healing brush. Now, this one works by evaluating the pixels that are around where you want to make the edit. The big difference here with the with the healing brush versus spot healing is you tell Photoshop where you want to sample from. And so in every other way it works pretty much the same. So if you alt click or option click on a Mac where you want to sample from, and then you go ahead and you bring it up, you can see how we can start to bring in some of that detail back, and we lose those specular highlights, which I think was a little bit distracting. And you can see you can take it from different loaves of bread, and the more you play with it, the better your edit's gonna be overall. But I think that's a pretty significant difference, just there to there. I think this is one of your better images in terms of overall exposure and composition. You have your friend pretty neatly centered in the picture. You're careful not to crop off any fingers or knuckles, and so that's a good thing. And she's clearly in a very obviously defined activity, so that's a good thing as well. Now, when you're taking pictures of people, you want to be careful how you're cropping, and I would say this is really kind of borderline. When you're clipping off parts of the body, it doesn't matter if it's a person or an animal, or even really if it's a still life. I mean, here with the glass, the same rules apply. You want to make sure that if you are cropping, it looks like it's something that you did on purpose. Getting just a little bit of the top of the head off makes it look like you just weren't really paying attention. But if you come in a little more, so we're maybe half of her head is gone, then it looks like it was a conscious decision to really kind of come in close. It can be kind of minor, but once you start to pay attention to those details, you realize how important they can be. Family picture here, I think you're working with some tricky lighting with the overhead light. Again, you can tell it's a little hot next to where your light source comes from, here on the refrigerator, but then also even more importantly on this young man. We start to see a little bit of a hot spot on the side of his cheek and a little bit of a shadow from his brow over his eyes. This is the kind of situation where a little bit of fill flash can really make a huge difference. You don't need to have your flash on full power, but having just a little bit can lighten these areas up a little, and it gives a much more even and balanced exposure. Definitely something that I'd encourage you to practice with if you're going to continue taking pictures of family members and friends. One caveat is that if you have your flash very close to your lens, you're much more likely to get red eye for anybody who is looking directly at the camera. So obviously it wouldn't be a problem for this young man, but for this woman here, she's looking directly at you. You might be more likely to see a little bit of a red eye if you are using if it's like the LED on a smartphone, as opposed to external kind of flash unit that you would put on your camera. I think this one here is also very well exposed. Your angle is a little awkward in that it makes it look like you are either really tall compared to your mother or she's really short. I would like to see you get down a little bit, maybe just crouch a little bit so you're more eye level with her, or your camera's more eye level with her, and I think that would have a more natural feel. In terms of edits, I think just a little bit of touch up like this can go a long way. The rest of your images here I think are in pretty good shape. You could potentially bring out a little detail here. One of the ways we might do that is copy that onto a new layer, and once you make a selection around it, you can use Control J or Command J if you're on a Mac, and then change the blending mode to screen. Now you mentioned that you felt like Lightroom was reasonable and then Photoshop was much more complicated. Once you start doing things like blending mode, that even ratchets up another notch. But it's definitely a great way to make these kind of edits. So you can see right away now we see much better detail here around his eye, but of course it looks unnatural in the way that we selected that. So what we want to do here is blend it in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask, but if I hold down the Alt key or Option on the Mac, it turns it black, so it hides everything we just did. So now if we paint with a white brush, and it's going to be much smaller than that, we can start to feather in the effect just where we want it, and ultimately we'll get a nice sort of blended effect where we minimize the little bit of shadow region. And of course this is the kind of thing where the more time you spend on it, the better it's going to look. But you kind of get the idea. And I think what we're seeing here is maybe it's emphasizing a little bit of red. So what we'd want to do here is maybe desaturate the reds specifically somewhere in there, and maybe even lighten it up a little bit. And then because we already made a mask for right where we want it, what we can do is make this this layer here respect what's going on with that layer mask just below it. And so the way that we do that is what we call a clipping layer mask, and you can see the Alt Control G. So now everything that's going on here is only affected by the same layer mask, and so that's just a quick and easy way. And you can see that's a pretty good edit. If we go back to just the beginning, you can see the before and the after. So I think overall, good concept. You have some good ideas about your approach to it. A few little tweaks, both at the time of exposure and in post-processing, can help you make your images even stronger yet. Let me know if you have any questions.